You're listening to the Law Frog Radio Show with David McDivitt and Ross Ford on Kilo 94.3 FM. Presented by McDivitt Law Firm.
This lawyer today was eating a berry trio parfait from Starbucks.
Berry trio parfait? Sounds not that great,
yes,
actually.
Yeah.
Why not like a cinnamon roll?
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. You'd be surprised.
All right. Hey, buddy. Well, hi. How are you? What's going on?
And a chocolate croissant.
And a chocolate croissant?
Well, I'm doing well. I'm doing very well. Okay. They're really good. Their chocolate croissants are very good. This was a breakfast on the go today.
He's just a busy guy. He's a man about town. He's saving lives. Before we get to some of our questions,
I just reached my hand out the window, grabbed a.
He literally.
Oh, I was just saying. I reached my hand out the window, grabbed the parfait. Yep.
Look at that. He can field legal questions. He can drive a car, and he can eat Starbucks snacks all at the same time. That's a multitasking mofo. That's what you want in your lawyer, right there. Right, that kind of mad skill. Okay, like I said, we got some great questions today. A couple tough ones to get to as well. But before that, I want to gripe, and I kind of know the answer to this one because we've been talking about it, unfortunately, for like almost 3 years when it comes to COVID and the pandemic. Tracing down who gave you COVID. I was very, very good through this whole thing. You know, I mentioned I hadn't taken a sick day since October of 2019. I had acquired almost 200 hours of sick time because I'm not taking it, because I'm not getting sick, because I'm doing what I need to do, right? And then, Dave, I have to go to the DMV, and they make me sit in that room and wait for my stupid ticket to come up for almost 2 hours, and then there was problems getting the plates, and so it was another hour, so almost 3 hours in this thing. And I couldn't leave because they say if you miss your number, you lose your turn in line. And they didn't have anything outside. They should have to have like those things available outside so you could stand outside. It was a nice summer day and I would have been fine. But no, and I was like literally the only guy in the whole place with a mask. So, how do I sue the DMV? Take me away. How do I do it?
Well, you have two questions there, really.
Yeah.
How do you sue the DMV and whether you'd be successful in suing the DMV? Were you around anybody else? I mean, have you really isolated it to the DMV? And by the way, it'd be any number of people there.
Oh, there was a million people there, and I was talking about.
Well, you wore your mask.
It's a dangerous place because the DMV is something you have to have. So you got to have your license to drive, and that's part of your job. You got to have your place for your car, or you can't drive your car, and that's your job. So even if you're not feeling good, you're like, well, I got to do this. So I'm sure people would show up to the DMV even if they didn't feel 100%. So it's a dangerous place in the first place.
I think the DMV's primary defense would be the reason you had to wait so long and there was an issue with the plates and all of that is because you had this prior arrest record that you hadn't cleaned up. And so that's what caused the delay, Ross. That's what caused that's really on you.
You don't wear pants near elementary school one time and suddenly you're the bad guy.
And you're the bad guy. You're the problem. I know.
Because this question was brought to us literally like the first days of the pandemic. A lady who caught it at work, her boss traveled to China back and forth. I think she's like a legal aid or something. She's like, I know I got this from her.
An accountant. He was an accountant.
Yeah, and you'd mention, like, no, you really can't prove where you contracted this thing. Even if you knew that was the only place I was around people. It sucks. Sucks. I tried so hard, David.
I know, but I mean, I know, and you done good, Ross. You done good.
I made it to the final 30%, dude.
Yeah, that's right. Congratulations. You get a gold star.
I just felt like I was double punched. It's like, first of all, no one was going to the DMV. And then bless those people, too. They got a tough job, the folks that work there. It's a grind, I know. But yeah, it's like, man, something you don't want to do in the first place. And it turned into one of those typical days of the DMV where nothing went right. And then, then 3 days later, get COVID. God damn!
Well, hey, Ross, a bigger question, though, is when you were there, did you have good cell reception? Were you able to actually use your phone?
Yes.
Did you surf the internet?
I did. I was listening to the Trailer Park Boys, which is just a greasy, stupid podcast.
I feel less sorry for you.
Yeah. So, all right. I mean, I just, like I said, I just feel doubly offended. I think I should at least get a written apology from the DMV, right?
The head of the DMV.
Yeah, Mr. DMV.
Major Domo.
Major DMV, give me a call and apologize. All right, well, how do you want to break up these questions here today? We got three really good ones. We got a guy who wants to know if he does a podcast and tells stories of his childhood shenanigans, I guess we could call it.
Shenanigans.
Will he get prosecuted or could he get prosecuted? We got a sad one with a guy.
Can we end on that one?
Do you want to close? Okay, let's close on that one. Do you want to? We'll start with the tough one.
I want to close on that one.
Do we start with the toughest one?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, hold on a second here. I'm going to read the question for everyone, and then we'll take a quick break and be back with the answer to this one. And like I said, it is really tough. Guy's saying a relationship is falling apart. Alcohol is a big factor. I'm currently 1,232 days sober. Good job. She still drinks and drinks often, sometimes drinks to excess, and then bringing lies and manipulations with that. They're not married, and 4 years ago they adopted a baby girl who was born in the jail with drugs in her system, lots of problems, special needs kid, and the mother is kin to his lady, his girlfriend, his wife, whatever you want to call her. So they did a family adoption 4 years ago. They had a son together 2 years ago. And he wants, obviously, separation, but then he wants partial, if not full custody of both these kids. Is that possible? It's the last thing he says. This is the heartbreaker here. Last thing I want to do is for the kids to suffer, but I feel it's inevitable. Yeah. Really tough. So David conquers that story. And we'll pick that up next here at Kilo.
You're listening to the Law Frog Radio Show with David McDivitt and Ross Ford on Kilo 94.3 FM. Presented by McDivitt Law Firm.
Relationship has fallen apart. Alcohol is a big factor. Currently 1,232 days sober. She still drinks often, sometimes to excess. And then, so I did the math. They've been together for 4 years. He's been sober for like 3.5 years then. 1,232 days.
That's impressive.
So, yeah, and I'm sure it's tough. You both went into the relationship enjoying sipping down some libations, maybe a little too much, and then you don't share that. It's got to be difficult. And then to get children involved.
Well,
Go ahead.
I don't know how long they've been together. They adopted the baby girl the girl was born 4 years ago.
Okay, that's actually a good point.
So they could have been together for 10 years prior to that.
Okay, yeah. All right. See, I was assuming that 4 years. So, not married, but 4 years ago they adopted a baby girl. This was akin to her folks. And a baby was born in jail with drugs in its system as a special needs child, and they have a son together that's 2 years old. So he thinks that it's inevitable, this divorce. He wants at least partial custody, which I think is pretty much a guarantee. But what about full custody of both the kids?
Sure, and you bring up a really good point. So you have to kind of separate this into a couple of different things. You take the alcohol, take the special needs of the child, take all of that out of the equation for just a moment. You've got a couple of things to look at. You've got a man and a woman who are in a relationship. They say they're not married, so let's assume that they did not put themselves out as married. They're not common law married, so they can just essentially break up. They don't have to go through a divorce proceeding to terminate their relationship.
And there's not a certain amount of years in Colorado?
Well, if they're not holding themselves out as married.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you can be common law married, and if you were common law married, then you do have to generally go through a formal breakup process. But if he's saying they're not married, just because you live with somebody, as long as you just kind of present yourself as we're partners, but we're not married, etc. If you haven't fallen into that common law construct, then that's one thing. But the bigger issue, married or not, is the idea of how do you deal with custody of these children. Yeah. So the boy that they had that biologically is their son is one issue. The adopted girl, when he said it's a family adoption, I'm assuming
that's her side of the family, I think.
For purposes of our right, that may be the case, but if he formally adopted that child and so did his girlfriend, if they both formally went through the full formal process and they are now the legal parents of that little girl, then it's treated for a custody perspective the same as their biological son. Mm. So for purposes of our conversation here, let's assume that they did this formally, that they're not just basically caretakers or foster parents, that they are actually her legal parents. Now, so then the custody conversation becomes, how do you divide custody? And short of an agreement between the two parents on how that they'll divide this custody, and I'm assuming based on the way he's described it and his girlfriend's alcohol use, lies, manipulation, she may not be willing to just agree to what he wants on this. Let's just assume she's not. What they would have to do is do a formal, go through the formal custody process. And they can, they'll ultimately be asking a court to, basically grant custody status to one or both parents jointly, or full custody. And with that goes things like decision making, parenting time. There are a whole host of things that have to be considered. So when you talk about partial custody, split custody, full custody, things like that, you're talking about a couple of different things. How much time is the children going to spend with dad? How much time are they going to spend with mom physically? Who gets to make the decisions? How are you splitting up holidays? Things like that. It can get kind of complicated, but it's super critical to get a framework in place, because once the framework is in place, then you can enforce it. So if mom is still drinking and she's lying and she's manipulating, then dad can go back to court and try to get the agreement enforced, or to try to modify it as needed. But at the early stages of this, if he's got real concerns about her alcohol use and whether or not she's going to be a safe parent for these children to be with, what he can do is ask for what they call a parental responsibility evaluation. It's a PRE. It's shorthand. And that is a process by which like an independent, usually psychologist, gets appointed to evaluate both parents. And so you might ask for it, but you're going to be evaluated to the same extent that your partner or your girlfriend or your wife is evaluated. And they will look into your the mental health issues. They will look into alcohol use. They will do home visits to see how the parents are dealing with the children. They'll look to see at the welfare of the children, because at the end of the day, their goal is to make sure that the custody is in the best interest of the two children. Uh-huh. And so oftentimes what you find is, you have one spouse who says, oh, my ex or my soon-to-be ex is just a basket case. He's a wreck or she's a wreck. They do the PRE, and the evaluator looks at both parents and like, well, look, you're both maybe not perfect individuals, but we think it's still in the best interest of the kids for custody to be split 50-50. So you don't always get what you want with the PRE. Theoretically, it can really bite you if the evaluator says, actually, your other partner is probably better equipped to take care of the kids.
It's you, dude. It's you. Interesting.
So
well,
you're the problem, man.
That's cool they have something like that set up, because you'd hate to think that they just start, well, hey, it's partial until someone does something horrible to the child. Then they can maybe take full custody. So, again, it's PRE?
And I'll just... PRE, Parental Responsibility Evaluation. And the other thing to understand, too, is Colorado tends to favor split time with both parents. So, historically, we think about... people getting divorced, and the mom tends to get more custody with the kids. Like, that's kind of the historical construct we have. Just like, wherever that comes from, that's just historically how it's been. But not been that way in Colorado for quite some time now. For a number of years, Colorado's just taken the position that, hey, child needs to be with both parents equally, unless there's some intervening factor that makes it not healthy.
There's a lot of pressure on the system to get this thing right. I mean, you'd hate to lock these kids in with a monster, but you also don't want to take them away, because none of these things are ever really great when it comes to divorces. So people are going to be pointing fingers. You're a rotten person. No, you're a rotten person, and maybe neither of you are a rotten person. You just don't like each other. All right, the PRE, I think, is the answer. Oh, what's that? You're kind of breaking up there. You sound like a robot, Dave.
No.
I'll tell you what. We'll get... you're jumping around us. Sounds like a bad Chevy Chase bit, doesn't it? Let's see.
Sorry.
We'll get to our next question here. We got a great one about a guy who wants to do a podcast to talk about his greasy childhood. Could he get in trouble? We'll close with that one here in a few minutes. Another serious one, though, too. Truck driver out of Denver letting us know his employer is operating illegally and telling drivers to drive when they're out of hours, not keeping the trucks within the DOT rules and other stuff like that. So what options do I have? Is it worth filing a grievance? Is it easier just to move on to a different company? Advice? What do you think, Dave?
Are you ready to tackle it now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, let's do it. Well, yeah, you're back on. It's good.
Okay, good. Yeah, no, there is a mechanism for filing a grievance or reporting these violations. There's the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Act, and it's through the Department of Transportation, Federal Department of Transportation, that would provide an avenue for reporting this kind of stuff. So his question, though, is it worth reporting it? Well, as a concerned citizen, as somebody who is on the roads. Yeah, go ahead, Ross.
I was going to say, is it a way you can do that anonymously? Because I understand you don't want to put your name out there and maybe lose your job or get a bad reputation and not be able to get a job.
I think that there is. These tend to be, I don't know for sure how that grievance process works. You can go online and kind of follow the trail, and it'll explain how to do that. I suspect there may be some anonymity to it, because that's what people naturally want to do, is to avoid being singled out for this. But they're going to need to have enough facts to be able to do a investigation, or to decide whether or not to even do an investigation.
Right.
What they don't want is a system where you've got really disgruntled employees who just don't like the boss, making these claims that really don't have any foundation, and they can do it under the cloak of anonymity. But they're again, I don't know for sure if it's anonymous or not, but I could look into that. And so can this driver.
And we had a couple calls yesterday where we were talking about
I'm
this.
an advocate for that.
We were talking this in advance yesterday, and then I had a couple people call, and one guy called, said he was a part of this, and his boss was like, don't worry, I'll back you up if anything happens. And they got popped, and guess who didn't back him up? His boss. It was like, I didn't know he was driving illegal. That was all him. It's like, man, so yeah, something you want to screw with, because then you're the one who loses your license, and you're the one who can't do your job then. And your old boss just keeps on rolling. So,
and that's the problem with a lot of these companies. They are flagrantly violating these rules that are in place. We've got vehicles that are 10,000 pounds or more, and they've got special rules and regulations in place to keep those drivers safe, the drivers of those vehicles safe, and the people on the road who are next to them safe. And that's why I said, the concerned citizen in me wants this person to report it. But he, if it does come back to bite him, that's obviously a concern. And then his other question is it worth my time, or should I just go and find another job? Well, you might be able to find another job, and I hope that the next employer is, adhering to the rules and playing by those rules. But it's not always an easy gig, and that's what happened. These trucking companies are under so much pressure. The bottom line, to make sure that they get things delivered, on or under the time that they bid on, that they're encouraging people not to take the mandatory breaks that they're required to take. Sometimes they keep separate logs. They have the log that is reported, that is kind of the official log, but then they keep their own separate logs to secret logs. No, I know it's the messy underbelly of that.
Dude, I can see, especially in this environment now where there's so much money hanging out there. It's like, wow, if I could just have a guy drive 3 extra hours a day. That's a total of 21 hours a week. That's a total of 80 hours a month. I can make millions. And that's unfortunately just drives that kind of mentality.
I know. And sometimes they incentivize the drivers too, so you've got both parties are complicit in this behavior. You got the employer who's willing to bend the rules. You got the driver who's willing to bend the rules. And then ultimately the person who suffers is the person who is, on the interstate, and it gets rear-ended by a truck driver who's fallen asleep at the wheel. Yeah. Or who's T-boned by a truck driver who blows a red light because they're distracted, they're groggy. It's scary.
Dangerous.
These are dangerous vehicles.
Right. And another guy who called yesterday mentioned, he's like, there's so many jobs out there for drivers. Get a new job right now, and then right when you get that job, report the old guy. And just move on, man. Move on. Because I didn't think about that. The overall safety is huge.
You know what?
All right. Well, let's see here. We'll be back.
That's how I look at it.
In a moment to conquer the best question of the week. And it's an interesting scenario. Anonymous dude wants to tell some stories about he and his kids, his buddies when they were teens to young adults. And some of those stories have questionable details, he says, in quotes. So he wants to know if there's an amount of time since something happened before they can talk freely about it without getting backlash. Or, getting, what is it? Statute of limitation, I think.
Yes, statute of limitations.
Boom! So he says, P.S., there's no murder or cold cases. Just wanted to document our childhood and our teen years and a podcast. We kind of have an example from Anonymous last hour about kind of what stories So I'm going to give you his story, and then you can tell us what you think about, is it a good idea to go out and air your dirty laundry? My thing is my parents are still alive. I can't tell a lot of stories because they would be saddened.
Yeah,
they would be sad.
They'd be mortified by your behavior.
So we'll pick it up here next is the Law Frog joins us here for our monthly visit.
You're listening to the Law Frog Radio Show with David McDivitt and Ross Ford on Kilo 94.3 FM. Presented by McDivitt Law Firm.
I want for the record, I'm not driving a car while I'm eating.
No, it sounds
I was eating before.
Are you in the McDivitt jet?
No, not in the McDivitt jet, because there is no McDivitt jet, but I love a McDivitt jet.
Talk to your man.
Hey, I wanted to.
You're turning a robot again.
Found website.
There we go.
Oh.
We've had some issues there for whatever reason. Have we finally learned that you, in fact, are not a human? You are a robot. Is that maybe the case, Mr. McDivitt? The robot lawyer.
I've heard that before. Yeah.
All right, there you are.
Robot. The guy who had a question about his trucking situation. He works for a trucking company. There's a website. He may be listening right now, but it's fmcsa.
fmcsa.dot.gov. Okay. And what is that to?
.dot.gov. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration.
Ooh.
And it provides different avenues for filing these complaints, which may not be anonymous. I know I told you that may not be. I don't know because I haven't dug into the forms themselves. But, if they're being coerced into violating these rules, they have, within 90 days of the date that the coercion took place, they have to file and provide evidence of, text messages, things like that. And then also there's a whistleblower avenue, too, through OSHA. And it's very clear if you go to this website how to go about making one of these complaints if it's something that he wants to do.
Okay, cool. Again, that's fmcsa.dot.gov. And you need that. Anyone needs that at all. I got that written down here in the studio. Just give us a call when we're done here with today's Law Frog segment. Okay, let's get to the big one. We talked to Anonymous earlier. Wants to tell stories of his teenage years. Some of it's probably illegal. Can he still be held accountable if he tells these stories on a podcast? And then we tracked him down last hour. He's like, just give me an example, like one of the most crazy stories. He's like, all right, well, involved some illegal drugs, a prostitute, and they weren't of age. He's like, we were, kind of older. So, because we asked him, were you 18? He's like, well, we were close. So that's kind of an example of a story he'd like to tell. Is there going to be ramifications? And if not for that story, what would lead to someone to get in trouble telling old stories from 30 years ago or whatever?
Well, you hit the nail on the head in the last segment. You talked about statutes of limitations, which will apply in the criminal context. Various crimes have various statutes of limitations, which means if a crime was committed outside of that time frame, or like let's say what crime was committed within that time frame, and you are caught, you can be prosecuted for that crime. If it's outside of that time frame, you're basically free from being criminally charged for that, because they deem it old, like an old crime. There are some crimes, and that's why it's important that we're not talking about murder here.
He did go on to say, he says, P.S., no murder
assault
or cold cases. So at first I was like, yeah, you can't tell stories. Oh, yeah, one time we kidnapped this drifter, and we took him out in the woods, we fed him to pigs. Yeah. It was hilarious. He was all like, oh, I got a family. Yeah. Something like that, probably not going to get away with, right?
Right. Don't put that on a podcast.
Okay.
And turn yourself in, by the way. This stuff about the illegal drugs. Go ahead.
Does the statute of limitation, does it range on a speeding charge a couple of years, and then does a murder ever go away? Probably not, right? They can't just say, oh, you're fine.
No, not. No, the murders, there's no statute of limitation on murder, and I don't believe there is one on sexual assault either. So rape. Those are two things where they just say, look, it could have happened 40 years ago. If we catch you, we're going to prosecute you.
Yeah, Harvey Weinstein.
So
Bill
I don't know how old
Cosby.
Anonymous is now. Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah. And so, we're assuming this took place in Colorado.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, that's,
I don't know how old the guy is now.
Another question we asked, were you in a state where prostitution was legal? And he's like, no, it was here in Colorado.
Okay. All right. I'm just sorry. That just begs all sorts of questions.
No, I want to hear the podcast.
But
big time. Big time.
And so, the other thing is that you've got to be careful that, there was clearly a third party there who was engaged in something that might not be legal as well. I'm talking about the person that they hired.
Right.
And so is that person going to get caught up in this? I don't know. We don't know how long ago did some of this stuff happen. If it's been only a couple of years, I mean, they might be right in the middle of the sweet spot of being able to be criminally prosecuted. And I bring that up too because some of the stuff that they might have done, if it affected somebody else, there may be a civil claim that is kind of latent. And usually there's a civil case, for a lawsuit, for example. Those also have statutes of limitations. The person who was wronged has a time frame in which they have to sue the person who wronged them. But if they didn't know who it was that wronged them, and then they're only now discovering it, they may have an argument that their statute hasn't expired yet. I don't know how strong that argument would be because I don't know the nature of the conduct. But that's what he's really looking at. Now, if let's say he's 30 years old and he's talking about pot when he was 17. It was over 10 years ago.
Oh, we've turned into robot again, David. Unfortunately. That is the weirdest thing.
I took my face mask off.
Okay, so
I'm a cyborg.
You're saying, so let's say he's 30 years old now. It happened when he was 17. Pick up from there.
Yeah, he's happened when he was 17, so it's 13 years ago. And we're talking about smoking pot, which was maybe illegal 13 years ago, but it's legal now. He's not going to – I don't see him getting in trouble for that. But if he's talking about selling heroin to other minors, 4 years ago, for example, I mean, that may be again, I don't know the statutes of limitations on a lot of these on the felonies and the misdemeanors. Just there are lawyers who specialize in criminal law who would know off the top of their head probably what some of these statutes are. But those are the things to be worried about. Who else are you implicating? I mean, there's a PR component to this too. Like, do you really want this out there? Now, I will tell you this: there are national radio people that I listen to, who go on the radio. They have podcasts that are broadcast on the radio, and they talk about. One of them is a former NFL player. He talks about the drug use he did while he was in the NFL. I mean, like illegal drugs, steroids are bad too. But what I mean is, like, talks about pot and acid and things like that. I'm like, he's not getting in trouble for that because it's old news. It's past the statute of limitation. And he's taking the PR risk for it, but it's part of his shtick, for example.
So what about, let's go back to
this guy might find
high school shenanigans. I was in high school. Let's say I hated a teacher, hated the principal. And so one time slashed all 4 of his tires. And that was 30 years ago. Is that still something that you can still get bit for?
That would be a tough. I mean,
right.
I don't think criminally, probably not. But civilly, I mean, the principal could maybe come back to him and say, you owe me $300 for new tires. Now that I know it was you who did it, Anonymous.
And then, obviously you don't want to use anyone's names, Mr. Anonymous, when it comes to this thing. Now, what if you did a disclaimer too, sir? No. The following stories may or may not be true. It's Mr. Anonymous's stories of stupid or something like that. Does that get you out of it?
Well, yeah, sure. You can. Well, it gets you out of it to the extent that somebody listening is going to have to decide if they want. I mean, let's say it's a prosecutor or a police officer or something, would have to then take the time to dig in to find out whether or not that's true. You're totally free to get out there and say, okay, this is a story that I'm fabricating of what I did in my youth, right? This is all fiction. But if they find out that actually it's not fiction, but that you're talking about stuff you really did, just because you said it was fiction doesn't then absolve you of guilt for it, right?
There are no easy answers ever with this crap. Never.
No. But there are lawyers who help with intellectual property that they may want to contact too to help kind of navigate the waters here with this podcast.
Yeah. Just like, would you? If they would,
it sounds like
in that case, would you write down your 20 favorite stories and give them to a lawyer, and he'd say, "Yeah, that one's good. That one's good. Probably don't want that one. Probably don't want that one." Something like that. Is that how it's going to run down, or?
Yeah, I think that may be advisable. I mean, look, you're talking about a lawyer here, so I mean, do I think it's smart to get out there and talk about all the bad stuff you've done? No, I don't. I don't think. I mean, unless you can turn that unless you can become a very lucrative career out of talking about your prior exploits, then it's just kind of, it's like boasting for some cheap experience that could burn you. But again, maybe he's gonna be just fine. I don't know how long ago this stuff happened, and I don't know how extreme it was. I mean, it's and then the other thing is too, I mean, we're talking about a minor who is hiring a prostitute and doing illegal drugs. So there are other things that come into play too, which is did an adult know about this? Did the adult provide this information, like the drugs to them? Like, where did they get the prostitute? Like, you got all sorts of things. And see, that's the thing. If the prostitute wasn't an adult, I mean, then you have a whole host of other major considerations. And by the way, whether that prostitute was an adult, there are really problems with what that prostitute did too, which would be, considered possibly some kind of statutory sexual assault too. So, I mean, it's
Dude, every question is always a quagmire. There's never like, oh yes, the answer is B.
Well, but Ross, look at the questions that we're being asked, though.
I know.
These are quagmire types of questions. I was 17 doing illegal drugs, hiring prostitutes. What do you think of that, lawyer? Okay, well, all right.
That's episode 1.
Yeah, that's not going to be an easy answer. Yes.
So I guess just to be cautious, do your own thing, and good luck. That's the final advice here, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, just beware. It may come back to bite you, but you may be fine too. Although that's the real gray area stuff here.
Exactly. And
I'm more comfortable with him saying, like, yeah, I dropped acid when I was in high school, and that was 20 years ago. I took mushrooms, in high school. That was 20 years ago. None of those are not good things. I don't condone that. But if you look at, like, 20 years later, talking about it, what kind of criminal risk that you have, it's close
minimal.
to none.
Yeah.
But when you talk about involving other people, including prostitution and maybe distribution, then it gets a little bit less clean.
Very interesting.
A lot less clean.
Also, too, you can become a child of your own torture when it becomes famous, or if it becomes a thing, then it could lead to you getting in trouble. Anytime that things blow up and get big, there are repercussions there where you just might have a small audience and friends and family listen, and it'll be all right. Well, Anonymous,
but
you
what
got
about
some
future
decisions
employers
to make.
too?
That's actually a good point as well, right?
I mean, that's the other thing. Yeah, I mean, there are so many practical. Like, when you want to go on record about all of the bad things that you've done in your life, and you make it into a podcast, that is out there for the world. And every future employer.
I used to steal stuff from my old place where I worked. That was awesome. Yeah, that will hurt your job future.
And what about your kids? Like, does he have kids? Does he want to have kids? Like, at some point, your kids are going to get old enough, and they may or may not think it was cool what you did, but that may actually make things difficult for them in school. Getting into college, that kind of stuff. Like, when you've got this record of this bad boy behavior can really kind of burn a lot of people along the way. We've got celebrities who are celebrities notwithstanding that kind of behavior, and then we almost celebrate some of that with some of these celebrities that are out there, the rock stars, the movie stars. Even some of these business leaders who've engaged in, or they'll actively talk about drug use, for example. And I think people start to forget that, for the majority of people, that stuff only hurts you in trying to get ahead. Absent some kind of world-class talent that you're able to bank on, that then allows you to kind of open the book a little bit and say, I've made these millions of dollars selling these records, and I'm a talented musician, and I'm kind of one of a kind, and by the way, along the way I had some drug issues, right? Or I got involved with this or that. Well, people start to think, they start conflating the two, thinking, okay, one almost equals the other, when really, if you're just a normal person trying to get ahead in life, trying to get a job, making sure your kids can get into college, and you're broadcasting this kind of stuff, those two don't always go hand in hand very easily.
Yeah, it's that pebble in the water, the ripple effect, huh?
Thank you for listening to the Law Frog Radio Show with David McDivitt and Ross Ford on Kilo 94.3 FM, presented by McDivitt Law Firm.